Welcome back to Creed's Grave Part 3. The Creed-Hart crime thriller set in the shadowy corners of New Orleans. This is what happened in Parts 1 and 2 of Creed's grave. Danny Castellanos ran for his life through St. Sebastian Cemetery, clutching a torn envelope. Those patient footsteps stopped the moment he entered, not because he'd lost his pursuer, but because they knew he was trapped. Danny died against the Lucien Creed mausoleum in what wasn't just murder. It was ceremony. His body arranged like an ancient offering, surrounded by ash circles and forgotten symbols. Enter Detective Lila Hart and her bull-headed partner Marcus Brick Riley, along with crime scene techs and uniformed officers. They discovered 5 military-grade surveillance cameras hidden throughout the cemetery. Someone with serious money had been watching. Then the impossible happened. A massive tomb lid slid open with hydraulic precision, fog pouring out like the cemetery's dying breath. From that breach stepped Talon Creed, immaculate charcoal suit, pale as winter bone, steel-gray eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh to whatever lay beneath. He claimed ownership of the cemetery through an 1878 land deed that shouldn't exist. Creed knew their names without reading badges, spoke Spanish like he'd learned it centuries ago. Most disturbing of all, he'd watched Danny die and done nothing to stop it. He handed Hart a flash drive containing footage of the murder, then vanished back into his tomb, promising to appear at police headquarters for questioning. The betting pool at the 8th District Precinct ran 3-1 that he'd never show. Hart returned to the station with evidence that might solve the case, but also questions that threatened to shatter everything she thought she knew about life and death. She copied the video files as backup, but before she could watch them, Captain Banks summoned her to his office. She found Riley on the roof, shaken to his core by their encounter with something that felt like calm, polite death. Now they're walking back into a precinct buzzing with supernatural speculation, where every cop is waiting to see what fresh hell awaits. The flash drive burns in Hart's pocket like a loaded gun. But Hart and Riley don't know what's really coming. They don't know about the teacher, Creed's former student who's been perfecting the art of ritual murder. They don't know about the underground kingdom beneath New Orleans, where ancient hungers are fed. They don't know that Hart has been chosen for something far more dangerous than solving a simple homicide. What happens when the investigation takes them into darkness that maps don't chart? When Hart discovers that Creed's interest in her is far from professional? And when the teacher decides it's time for the final lesson? The hunt for truth is about to become a fight for survival. Chapter 13. Captain Roland Banks's office smelled like old coffee and disappointment. The walls were lined with commendations from 3 decades of police work, but the fluorescent light cast everything in harsh shadows that made even the achievements look tired. Banks sat behind his desk like a judge about to pass sentence, his weathered face unreadable. Lila and Riley stood in front of his desk, waiting. Neither spoke. The silence stretched until Banks gestured at the 2 chairs across from him. "Sit," he said. "Tell me what happened this morning, from the beginning." Lila had spent the walk from the roof organizing her thoughts, choosing her words carefully. The precinct was already buzzing with supernatural speculation. The last thing they needed was official documentation of vampire theories and zombie encounters. "We responded to a body found in St. Sebastian Cemetery at 6:47 a.m., she began, keeping her voice level and professional. Victim was a young male, mid-20s, positioned in what appeared to be a ritualistic manner. Banks nodded, his pen moving across his notepad. Ritualistic how? Deliberate placement. Someone took time to arrange the scene like a ceremony or offering. The killer wasn't just disposing of a body, they were making a statement. Continue. During our investigation, we discovered multiple surveillance cameras hidden throughout the cemetery, professional-grade equipment, carefully concealed in angel statues and monument decorations, 5 cameras total, providing overlapping coverage of the entire area. Installed by who? Lila hesitated for just a moment. This was where things got complicated. A man named Talon Creed claims to own the property beneath the cemetery under an 1878 land deed. Says he lives there. Banks's pen stopped moving. Lives where exactly? Underground, beneath the cemetery. Lila kept her voice matter-of-fact, as if reporting the weather. He has documentation showing ownership of everything 12 feet below the surface. Says the city owns the cemetery, but he owns what's underneath. And you verified this, how? He showed us what appeared to be an authentic legal document on his phone. We haven't had time to confirm its validity yet. Banks made another note. So how'd you meet this Creed guy? Here it was, the part that sounded insane no matter how she said it. He came out of one of the tombs while we were working the scene, Lila said. Big stone thing with nothing on the tombstone. The stone lid just slid open and he walked out. Banks's pen stopped. He looked up. The stone lid opened? Yeah, some kind of mechanism looked like, moved smooth like it was motorized or something. And he was inside because, like I said, he claims it's the entrance to his residence beneath the cemetery. Riley shifted in his chair beside her but remained silent. Lila could feel the tension radiating from him, the frustration of trying to explain something that defied explanation. Banks set down his pen and leaned back. Detective Hart, let me ask you again. Are you telling me a man lives inside a grave, and he is alive? I'm telling you that's what we saw, Captain. How he's managed to convert a burial vault into living space I couldn't say, but he was definitely alive, definitely coherent, and definitely familiar with the murder. Familiar how? This was where even Lila's careful professionalism couldn't mask the strangeness. He knew details about murder that he shouldn't have known. He called it meticulous work, though somewhat derivative. The symbolism lacks originality. Just a poor attempt at copying an absolutely stunning work from earlier. He also knew the names of officers who hadn't been introduced to him, how long we'd been on scene, what we'd discovered. Banks set his pen down completely. He said it was a copycat. That's what it sounded like he'd seen this exact type of murder before. When? Where? I don't know, we didn't get a chance to ask. Lila shifted in her chair. But the way he said it, like he was comparing it to something specific. And the surveillance footage? He gave us a flash drive. Claims it shows the whole murder. Lila patted her pocket. Why didn't this Creed guy call 911 when he had this footage? Was he not aware that a murder was happening in the cemetery? He admitted he watched it happen live. Banks leaned back, processing. And when you asked why he didn't call it in? He said someone dies every day, multiple someones. Said if he concerned himself with every act of violence in this city, he'd have precious little time for anything else. Lila's voice carried her frustration. Like watching people get killed is just part of his daily routine. Jesus. Banks rubbed his temples. So we've got a guy who watches murders for entertainment and lives in a cemetery. Why? That's what we need to find out. Banks studied her for a long moment. Around them, the precinct noise continued. Phones ringing, conversations echoing through thin walls, the distant sound of the problem dogs barking outside. What was your impression of Mr. Creed? Banks asked, turning to Riley now. Riley's jaw worked for a moment like he was choosing between several unpalatable options. Captain, what Detective Hart is telling you is accurate, but hearing it secondhand. He paused, running a hand through his hair. It sounds like something out of a Stephen King novel. But you stand by her story? Every word. Riley's voice was firm despite his obvious discomfort. I've seen IEDs, insurgents, combat zones where reality gets flexible. This was something else entirely. But Hart's giving you the facts as we saw and observed them. Banks turned his attention to Lila. And your take on this Creed guy, Detective Hart? Lila chose her words carefully. Intelligent, well-spoken, evasive as hell, but not openly hostile. He agreed to come in for questioning, but insisted on driving himself. You let a potential witness drive himself to the station? He wasn't technically under arrest and he volunteered to cooperate. Plus, Lila glanced at Riley, then back to Banks. He demonstrated a level of familiarity with legal procedure that suggested attempting to detain him might have been problematic. Problematic how? He seemed to know exactly what his rights were and wasn't shy about exercising them, made it clear that cooperation was voluntary and could be withdrawn at any time. Banks leaned forward, his voice getting sharper. So let me get this straight. You've got a guy living under a cemetery who watches murders happen and doesn't report them. He comes out of a goddamn tomb, knows things he shouldn't know, and you just, let him drive to the precinct? Captain, I'm not done. Banks's face was reddening. Has he shown up yet? This helpful witness of yours? Lila and Riley exchanged glances. Not yet. Jesus Christ. Banks rubbed his face with both hands. And where exactly is this flash drive with the murder footage? Right here. Lila patted her pocket. And have you watched it? Not yet. We came straight to you after you let our key witness disappear into thin air. Banks stared at them both. Where did he go? Did anyone follow him? Lila hesitated. He went back inside the same tomb, Captain. Same way he came out. The stone slid shut behind him. Banks stared at her. He went back into the grave. Yes, sir. The grave that he came out of? Yes, sir. Banks was quiet for a long moment, just staring. So, let me get this. Our witness lives in a tomb, came out to talk to you, then went back into the tomb. That's correct. And you thought this was normal enough to just let happen? Riley shifted uncomfortably. Captain, normal went out the window the moment we saw a 2-ton stone slab slide open by itself. Banks looked between them like they'd both lost their minds. Do you hear yourselves right now? Well, there were multiple other officers at the crime scene. You can ask them their version. Riley's voice carried an edge. Banks was getting on his nerves with the repeated questions. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Banks opened a folder on his desk and pulled out a thin stack of papers. There's been a break-in at the Marigny Vale Community Center, he said, his tone suddenly businesslike. Electronics stolen, office ransacked. I need you two to handle it. Detective Cole will be taking over the cemetery case. She's already been briefed and will be expecting the evidence transfer from you before you leave. What? Riley leaned forward, his military bearing giving way to something sharper. What's our mistake here? Was it because we let Creed drive himself instead of bringing him in? Banks didn't look up from the paperwork, his grip tightening on his pen. No mistake, just reassignment. Cole has more experience with unusual cases. Unusual cases? Lila's voice rose slightly. Captain, we've been working this from the beginning. We have a witness coming in, evidence to review, which you let go. It's a blunder. People get suspended for these things. You should be happy with just the reassignment. Riley's face flushed. It wasn't like he's a normal human. Riley exploded this time. Like I said, there were other officers at the scene. Ask them if you don't believe us. No one in the history of American policing has seen anyone come out of a grave alive. And I'm sure he'll be here any minute. Riley was furious, yet almost pleading. And Detective Cole will handle him. Banks finally looked up, avoiding their eyes, and there was something in his voice that stopped further argument. This decision comes from upstairs. My hands are tied. Riley shot to his feet so fast his chair toppled backward, clattering against the wall. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, knuckles white with pressure. How far upstairs? Banks said nothing. Riley's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. He took a step toward Banks's desk, his whole body coiled tight. I asked you a fucking question, Captain. Detective Riley. No. Riley slammed his palm down on Banks's desk hard enough to rattle the coffee mug. We bust our asses on this case. We do everything right. We get a witness, we get evidence, we follow every goddamn procedure in the book. And now you're yanking us off for what? So some golden child can waltz in and take credit. Banks's face hardened. Stand down, detective. Stand down. Riley's voice rose, that military edge turning dangerous. This is horseshit and you know it. What did we do wrong? Lila could see Riley's hands shaking with barely controlled rage. She'd seen him like this exactly twice before. Both times someone had ended up in the hospital. His face was flushed red, veins standing out on his neck. "Riley," she said quietly. He spun toward her, wild-eyed. "No, Hart. I'm done taking this shit. Done being shuffled around like—" "Is this coming from the chief?" Lila asked Banks, her voice cutting through Riley's building explosion. The question hit both Banks and Riley like cold water. Riley stopped mid-sentence, his fists still clenched, but something shifted in his face. Understanding. The pieces clicking together. Banks's silence stretched between them like a physical presence. He picked up his pen again, focusing on the paperwork with deliberate intensity. "Who else will be on this case?" "Aiden?" Lila asked. Banks' silence was louder than any words could have been. Lila felt the pieces clicking together, Aiden's family connections, the political pressure that always seemed to follow her cases, the way she and Riley consistently got pushed to the margins when anything high-profile developed. "Captain," she started. "The community center break-in." Banks interrupted, holding out the folder. "Victim's expecting you this afternoon." Lila stared at the folder without taking it. Everything they'd discovered, every lead they'd developed, every piece of evidence they'd gathered, handed over to someone who hadn't been there, hadn't seen what they'd seen, hadn't felt the bone-deep certainty that Talon Creed was something beyond ordinary police work. Riley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is bullshit, Captain. You know it, we know it, and whoever's pulling your strings knows it." "Detective Riley." "No." Riley's voice carried the edge it got when his military training kicked in. "We do good work. We solve cases. We don't play politics and we don't cut corners. So why are we getting shuffled off to petty theft while Cole and Aiden gets handed our investigation on a silver platter?" Banks set down his pen and looked at Riley with something that might have been sympathy. "Because sometimes good work isn't enough, Detective. Sometimes the job is about more than just solving cases." "Like what?" "Like knowing when to step back and let someone else take the lead." Lila finally reached for the folder, her movements sharp with controlled anger. "And if we refuse, then you'll be working traffic duty until you reconsider." Banks's voice was flat, final. "Your choice." The folder felt heavy in her hands, heavier than a simple break-in case should. She opened it briefly, scanning the details. Routine theft, no injuries, probably solved with basic canvassing and fingerprint work. The kind of case they gave to cops who needed to be kept busy and out of the way. "Will we at least be briefed on developments in the cemetery case?" she asked. "That's Detective Cole's call." Which meant number. Cole wasn't about to share information with the officers she'd just replaced, especially not when those officers had been removed by order from above. Riley moved toward the door, then stopped. "Captain, for what it's worth, I think you're making a mistake. Whatever's on that flash drive, whatever Creed tells us when he gets here, Cole's going in blind. We've got context she doesn't have." "Noted," Banks said without looking up. Lila stood, tucking the folder under her arm. At the door, she paused. "Captain, when this goes sideways, and it will go sideways, remember that we offered to see it through." Banks's pen stopped moving for just a moment, then he continued writing, his voice carefully neutral. "Get me a report on the community center by end of shift." The dismissal was clear. Lila and Riley stepped into the hallway, pulling the door closed behind them. The precinct buzzed around them, unaware that the most interesting case any of them had seen in years had just been transferred to a detective who had no idea what she was walking into. And somewhere in the city, Talon Creed was presumably driving toward a police station to meet with officers who would no longer be handling his case. Chapter 14. The dog stopped barking. Officer Martinez noticed it first as he was walking out of the precinct where the dogs were chained. The sudden silence hit like a slap. 3 days of nonstop snarling just gone. He looked up to see the massive cane corso and the Kangal mix sitting like statues, ears flattened, staring down the street with the rigid terror of prey animals that had just caught wind of death itself. A black shape materialized through the heat shimmer, not driving, floating. silent as cancer. 1937. Mercedes-Benz 540K, black as a funeral suit, moving with the whisper-quiet precision of something that had been maintained by people who understood that perfection was not negotiable. The engine didn't purr. It barely breathed. Martinez felt his stomach drop. He'd felt this same thing before. At the cemetery. The man who'd emerged from a grave like some Victorian nightmare come to life. The Mercedes pulled to the curb without even the whisper of brakes. The rookie officer Thompson feeding the dogs had frozen, water bowl trembling in his hands. The Kangal mix, the one that had nearly shredded his arm yesterday, was pressed flat against concrete, whimpering like a beaten child. Jesus, Martinez whispered, backing toward the precinct. He actually came. The car sat there, waiting, patient as a coffin. Through the precinct windows, faces appeared. Conversations died mid-sentence. Officers who'd been trading vampire jokes all morning now stared through glass like kids watching a hearse roll past their playground. The Mercedes door opened with the soft leather whisper of something expensive dying. Talon Creed unfolded from the driver's seat like smoke given form. Charcoal overcoat that probably cost more than most cops made in 6 months. Pale as winter bone. Moving with the fluid precision of someone who had never stumbled, never hesitated, never been uncertain about anything in his years of breathing. The rookie dropped his water bowl. It exploded against concrete, the crack sharp as gunfire. But the dogs didn't even twitch. They just kept staring at Creed with the blank-eyed submission of animals that had looked into the face of something they couldn't fight and couldn't understand. Creed closed the car door. The sound carried weight, final, definitive, like a judge's gavel. Martinez felt his cross burning against his chest. Dios mío, he breathed. Creed walked toward the precinct steps. No hurry, no hesitation, just the measured pace of something that had all the time in the world and knew exactly how to use it. Behind him, the Mercedes sat like a monument to a world that had died before most of these cops were born. But it wasn't dead. It was waiting, breathing, ready. Through the glass doors, Martinez could see the bullpen going quiet. Phones kept on ringing, but no one was picking them up. Conversations turned to whispers. Every eye tracked the figure approaching their building like he owned it. Which Martinez was beginning to suspect he might. Creed paused at the front desk, his steel gray eyes taking in the bullpen with the dispassionate interest of someone cataloging livestock. The desk officer, a 20-something woman named Patricia Santos who'd worked the front desk for years, looked up from her computer and felt her throat go dry. "Can I help you?" Patricia's voice came out smaller than she intended. "Detective Lila Hart asked me to come in regarding the St. Sebastian Cemetery," Creed said simply. His voice carried that same odd formality from the cemetery, crisp and articulate, like he was ordering wine at a restaurant that had been closed for decades. "I believe she's expecting me." Patricia glanced at her computer screen, then back at Creed. Something about the man made her want to help him, made the words tumble out before she could stop them. She's not handling that case anymore. Detective Cole is the lead. You should meet her." Creed's head tilted slightly, the same curious cat expression that had unnerved the officers at St. Sebastian. "Is that so?" "Yeah, captain's orders, but they have come down from upstairs." Patricia felt the words spilling out of her mouth like water from a broken dam. She tried to stop talking, but her tongue seemed to have a mind of its own. Lila Hart and Riley got reassigned to some bullshit case. Everyone knows it's political. She blinked hard, trying to shake off whatever was happening to her. She should not be saying all this to a stranger. But Creed's eyes held hers, and she found herself leaning forward, lowering her voice like they were old friends sharing secrets. "The Whitakers," she whispered, even though she'd never told anyone her inner thoughts before. "You know Aiden? Chief's son. He was dating Hart for like 2 years. Then his sister Eleanor, the mayor's wife, decided Hart wasn't classy enough for their precious family. So she gets Hart hung out to dry on that corruption thing that didn't stick for long. And Aiden? Spineless bastard just let it happen. The breakup was ugly as hell too. They had the screaming match right here in the bullpen, threw coffee at each other and everything. Hart got put on leave for 15 days after that shit show. And Aiden? Nothing. Not even a slap on the wrist. These motherfuckers always protect their own while the woman gets screwed over. It's always the same bullshit. Guy acts like an ass, woman pays the price. Now every time Hart gets something good, it disappears and goes to whoever's got juice with the right people. Mostly Aiden. Patricia's voice got bitter. Eleanor's a real piece of work too. Thinks her shit don't stink 'cause she's married to the mayor and daddy's the chief. Everyone here's terrified of her. One call from that bitch and you're directing traffic in the quarter. Hart never had a chance against that family. The words tumbled out faster now, years of suppressed frustration pouring out to this complete stranger. Detective Sabrina Cole's good police, don't get me wrong, but she's got the right last name. Right family friends. Hart. She's got talent but wrong side of the tracks. Story of this whole damn department. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with horror. What the hell was she doing? She'd just spilled classified department gossip to a man she'd never seen before in her life. The kind of talk that could get her fired, blacklisted, destroyed, but she couldn't remember deciding to say any of it. The words had just come. For a moment, something flickered across Creed's features. Not surprise exactly, but the cold satisfaction of a chess player who just realized his opponent had walked into a trap 3 moves ago. The Whitakers, he repeated, tasting the name like fine wine. How predictable. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. The way he said it, like he knew exactly who they were, what they were capable of, and found it all mildly amusing. And where might I find Detective Hart now? Patricia's mouth opened before her brain could engage. Marigny Vale Community Center. Some break-in case that wouldn't normally rate 2 detectives, but they had to put her somewhere. She pressed her lips together, but the words kept coming. 20 minutes southeast of here, near the old rail yards. Her hands were shaking now. She'd just given a stranger the exact location of an active police investigation. Career suicide didn't begin to cover what she'd just done. But Detective Cole can help you with the cemetery. She tried to do damage control. No. Creed's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it cut through the bullpen noise like a blade. The bullpen went silent. Not a gradual quiet, but an instant cessation of sound, as if a switch had been flipped. 30 cops, mid-sentence, mid-sip of coffee, froze and turned as one toward the front desk. My cooperation was specifically requested by Detective Hart. Substitutions are unacceptable. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia found herself nodding frantically, though she had no idea why she was agreeing with him. Creed turned toward the exit with that same unhurried pace. Martinez watched Creed turn toward the exit and felt something twist in his gut. Hart and Riley didn't deserve this shit. Everyone knew it. Good cops getting railroaded by politics while the golden children got handed cases on silver platters. He should keep his mouth shut, should let this play out however it was going to play out, should mind his own damn business like he always did. But his legs had other ideas. "Wait, sir?" he stuttered. The word tore out of his throat before his brain could stop it. Martinez found himself moving across the bullpen, his body acting on autopilot, while his mind screamed at him to sit the hell down and stay quiet. His hands were shaking so hard he had to shove them in his pockets. Every step felt like walking toward his own execution. The man from the cemetery, the thing that had made 2 attack dogs whimper like puppies, was looking at him now with those steel gray eyes that seemed to see straight through flesh and bone. Christ, what was he doing? Sir. He stuttered hard. "If you have 5 minutes." Martinez's voice cracked like a teenager's. Sweat was already beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning blasting overhead. "Detective Cole is here. Maybe you could tell her what you need? She's good at her job." The lie burned his tongue. Cole was good police, sure, but she was also the department golden child. Hart and Riley were the ones who should be handling this case, and something in Martinez's gut, the same instinct that had kept him alive through 3 gang shootings and a domestic call that went sideways, told him this man from the cemetery might be their only shot at justice. But Jesus, he was scared. Every primitive part of his brain was screaming at him to run, to get as far away from Creed as possible. Being near him felt like standing next to an open grave in the middle of a lightning storm. Creed studied Martinez with the cold patience of a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had never been refused. "Call Detective Hart." What? "Your phone. Call her." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command. It was simply a statement of what was going to happen next. Martinez's hand was already moving toward his pocket before his brain caught up. He tried to stop himself, tried to think of an excuse, but those steel gray eyes held him like a fish on a hook. Now. The word dropped into the bullpen silence like a stone into still water. Martinez's fingers were trembling so hard he almost dropped the phone twice before managing to dial Lila's number. Ring. Ring. On the third ring, her voice came through, tinny and distant. "Martinez? What's going on?" Martinez opened his mouth to explain, to warn her, to say something that made sense. Instead, he heard himself say, "Someone wants to talk to you," and was already holding the phone out to Creed before Lila could respond. Creed took the phone with the same casual grace he did everything else, as if accepting phones from terrified cops was just another Tuesday for him. Behind them, Patricia and the entire bullpen had gone dead silent. 30 cops, including Cole and Aiden, were watching this impossible scene unfold like they were witnessing a car accident in slow motion. "Martinez? What's going on?" Creed brought the phone to his ear, his voice carrying that same formal precision that had unnerved every cop at the cemetery. "Detective Hart, how good of you to answer." Silence on the other end, then, "Who is this?" "Talon Creed, you invited me to your precinct for questioning. I've arrived only to discover you've departed." "Mr. Creed." Lila's voice turned sharp, professional. "I didn't invite you anywhere. You said you'd drive yourself to the station. That's different from an invitation." "Semantics, detective. The result remains the same. I'm here, you're not, and I find myself dealing with substitutes." His tone suggested he found this mildly offensive. "I didn't say yes for this. The case has been reassigned. Detective Cole is handling it now. She's fully briefed and can—" "No." The single word carried such quiet finality that even through the phone, Lila felt its weight. "Mr. Creed, I don't have time for games. I'm working another case. If you want to provide information about the cemetery, Detective Cole—" "Will receive nothing from me," Creed interrupted smoothly. "My cooperation was contingent upon working with the detective who demonstrated competence at the scene. You showed an understanding of the situation's complexities. I'm disinclined to repeat myself for someone who wasn't present." In the background, Lila could hear Riley muttering, "Put it on speaker." She hesitated, then pressed the speaker button. Riley leaned closer, his face tight with anger. "This is Detective Riley." "What exactly are you saying, Creed?" Silence. Riley waited, his jaw clenching. "I asked you a question." More silence, as if Riley hadn't spoken at all. "Answer me, you son of a—" "Detective Hart." Creed's voice cut through Riley's building explosion, addressing Lila as if Riley didn't exist. "You have 15 minutes to return to the precinct. After that, I will assume your interest in the truth has diminished." Riley's face went red. The bastard was completely ignoring him, treating him like furniture, like he wasn't even worth acknowledging. But even as rage built in his chest, Riley's tactical mind was working. This asshole had information about the case, and that's why he was important, and that's why he could get them back on the case. Riley grabbed the phone and hit mute, his voice urgent. "Hart, listen to me. I don't give a shit about his games or his attitude. This might be our only shot at getting back on the case." Lila looked at her partner, seeing the war playing out on his face, military pride battling tactical necessity. "If the chief has pulled us off this case," Riley continued, his voice tight with controlled anger, "and if this bastard can help us to get back on the case, then I'm ready to swallow my pride." Riley hated everything about this situation, hated Creed's arrogance, hated being dismissed like he was nobody, hated that they needed this man's help. But he'd learned in Afghanistan that sometimes you had to work with people you despised to complete the mission. Do it. Riley pushed, swallowing his pride like broken glass. We use him to get back what's ours. I don't care if he treats me like shit as long as we get answers. Lila saw the cost of those words in Riley's face. Her bull-headed partner, who never backed down from anyone, was choosing to eat his pride for the greater good. She unmuted the phone. Fine. 15 minutes. Excellent. The line went dead. Riley stared at the silent phone, his hand shaking with suppressed rage. That condescending piece of shit. But even as he said it, Lila could see him already planning, already thinking 3 moves ahead like the soldier he'd been. Sometimes you worked with the devil himself if it got you closer to the truth. Chapter 15. Lila pulled into the precinct parking lot and immediately hit the brakes. What the hell? Outside the building, Talon Creed sat on the wooden bench like he was waiting for a bus, hands folded in his lap, looking as calm and serene as a man feeding pigeons in a park. On either side of him, the 2 massive dogs, the same ones that had been terrorizing cops for 3 days, were quietly eating from their bowls like well-trained house pets. No barking, no snarling, no foam-flecked jaws or rattling chains. To Lila, they looked like oversized golden retrievers enjoying a peaceful afternoon snack. You seeing this? She asked Riley. Riley's jaw was tight as he stared through the windshield. The sight should have been impossible. Those dogs had nearly taken off a Thompson's arm just yesterday. But there they were, calm as church mice, practically nuzzling against Creed's legs. Yeah, I see it, Riley muttered, his voice still carrying the edge from their phone conversation. He was still pissed about being ignored, but this was something else entirely. How the hell did he do that? Lila said quietly, watching the peaceful scene that should have been impossible. Through the precinct windows, she could see faces pressed against the glass, what looked like half the department crammed together, watching Creed like he was about to perform his next impossible trick. Some officers were standing on chairs to get a better view over their colleagues' shoulders. Officer Martinez was nowhere to be seen. Across the parking lot, Thompson stood about 20 feet away from the bench, water bowl forgotten in his hands. His face was a mixture of relief and pure bewilderment. For the first time in 3 days, he could approach the front of the building without risking his life and limb. But he looked like he was staring at a magic trick he couldn't figure out. The dogs hadn't just stopped being aggressive, they looked content, happy even. The cane corso's tail was actually wagging as it ate, and the Kangal had settled down with its massive head resting near Creed's feet. Riley got out of the car with more force than necessary, slamming the door behind him. Let's get this over with. As they approached the bench, Creed looked up with that same mild expression he'd worn at the cemetery, like the sight of 2 detectives walking toward him was only marginally more interesting than watching paint dry. The dogs didn't even lift their heads. Detective Hart, Creed said pleasantly. Punctual. I appreciate that in a person. His steel-gray eyes didn't even flicker toward Riley. As far as Creed was concerned, Riley might as well have been invisible. Riley's jaw clenched so hard Lila could hear his teeth grinding, but he kept walking. Whatever game Creed was playing, they were about to find out the rules. Chapter 16. Lila walked through the precinct doors first, her posture tense but professional. Behind her, Talon Creed followed with that same unhurried pace from the cemetery, moving like he had all the time in the world and everyone else was simply there for his convenience. The 2 massive dogs padded silently behind him, their earlier aggression replaced by devoted obedience. Riley brought up the rear, his jaw tight with suppressed anger, while Thompson, the rookie cop, trailed the entire procession at what he hoped was a safe distance. The bullpen went dead quiet. Every cop stopped mid-conversation, phones forgotten in their hands, paperwork abandoned on desks. The sight was impossible to process. Their colleagues leading a funeral procession through their workplace, complete with attack dogs that now moved like trained show animals. Creed paused just inside the doorway, not stopping exactly, but taking a moment to survey the hall with those steel-gray eyes, as if cataloging everything and everyone for future reference. The pause stretched long enough that Lila had to stop and wait, making it clear who was really controlling the pace of this parade. His charcoal overcoat hung perfectly from broad shoulders, the fabric so dark it seemed to absorb the harsh fluorescent light. Underneath, his suit was European cut, militaristic in its lines, expensive in a way that whispered rather than shouted. His shoes caught the light like black mirrors, but made no sound against the scuffed linoleum. Something followed him that had nothing to do with the dogs, a faint scent of smoke and leather and earth, like he'd brought the cemetery with him into their sterile world of coffee stains and disinfectant. Patricia at the reception desk felt her throat close. The same man who'd somehow made her spill department secrets was back, and just seeing him made her stomach twist with the memory of words tumbling out of her mouth without her permission. She tried to look away but found her eyes drawn back to him like metal filings to a magnet. Across the bullpen, Detective Sabrina Cole watched the procession with sharp eyes, her usual perfect composure intact. But something about Creed's presence made the air feel charged, electric. She forced herself to look away, focusing on her computer screen with deliberate intensity. Nearby, Detective Aiden Whitaker's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He had gotten to know that the bastard had refused to work with Sabrina, which meant he'd refused to work with Aiden too. It was a personal insult, and Aiden didn't forget insults. Every officer in the bullpen was watching now, some standing on chairs to get a better view over their colleagues' shoulders. The impossible parade moved through their workspace. A man in expensive attire smelling like a cemetery, leading two attack dogs like he was conducting a symphony only he could hear. When Creed finally resumed walking, it was with the same predatory grace, each step deliberate and measured. Time seemed to bend around him, making everyone else's movements appear frantic and desperate in comparison. "Take Mr. Creed to an interrogation room," Lila told Thompson, her voice crisp and professional but quieter than usual. "Detective Riley and I need to check with the captain." Thompson's face went white as old bone. The last thing he wanted was to be alone with the man who smelled like graveyards and the dogs that had been trying to kill him for 3 days. His mouth opened to object, but before any words could form, Lila and Riley were already walking toward the stairs, leaving him alone with his nightmare. "This way," Thompson heard himself saying, though he had no memory of deciding to speak. His voice sounded thin and distant, like it was coming from underwater. Thompson led them down the hallway, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to maintain some semblance of professional composure. Behind him, Creed moved with that same fluid precision, the dogs padding silently in his wake. Thompson could feel sweat beating on his forehead despite the air conditioning, and something cold was crawling up his spine with each step. As they reached the first interrogation room, he opened the door with hands that weren't quite steady. The small room looked even smaller somehow, the metal table and 2 chairs seeming insufficient for whatever was about to happen. Creed glanced inside and stopped. He didn't speak immediately, just stood there in perfect stillness, studying the space like an architect examining flawed blueprints. The silence stretched until Thompson felt compelled to fill it. "This is the standard size for all our interrogation rooms, sir," Thompson said, his voice coming out higher than usual. "They're all the same size. Well, except one, but that requires the captain's permission and—" Creed's steel-gray eyes shifted to Thompson, and something in that gaze made Thompson's chest tighten. No words were spoken, but Thompson felt an overwhelming certainty that this room was inadequate. Rules suddenly seemed negotiable. Procedures felt like suggestions rather than requirements. Without understanding why, without even wanting to, he found himself saying, "But I'm sure we can make an exception." And he led Creed to the double-sized interrogation room at the end of the hall, the one reserved for major cases and multiple suspects, the one that absolutely required the captain's permission to use. His hand moved on autopilot, turning the handle, opening the door, stepping aside like a doorman at an expensive hotel. Creed walked into the room and surveyed it with the same careful attention he'd given the smaller space. Then, apparently satisfied, he moved to one of the 2 chairs and settled into it, not sitting, but settling, like liquid finding its level. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed this exact scenario 1,000 times before. The dogs followed without hesitation, and to Thompson's absolute horror, both massive animals jumped onto the metal interrogation table like it was the most natural thing in the world. They arranged themselves facing Creed, sitting with perfect posture, their enormous heads tilted slightly as they watched his face with the devoted attention of disciples waiting for divine instruction. Thompson backed toward the door, his job done, when Creed's voice stopped him cold. "Officer Thompson." Thompson froze mid-step. Ice water flooded his veins. He'd never given this man his name. Maybe Creed had seen his name tag, but Thompson wasn't even sure it was visible from that angle. "Perhaps you should call your sister in Baton Rouge. She's been trying to reach you about your mother's medication." The words hit Thompson hard. His stomach dropped and he felt the blood drain from his face. He'd never mentioned his sister to anyone at the precinct, had never told a single soul that his mother lived in Baton Rouge or that she was sick. Had never spoken about the medication problems or the doctors or any of it. "How did you—" The words came out quickly in response. But Creed had already turned away, his attention settling on the dogs with the same quiet intensity he'd shown at the cemetery. As if Thompson had ceased to exist the moment he'd served his purpose. On getting no reaction, Thompson stumbled out of the room and closed the door, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the handle. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and he could taste bile in the back of his throat. He could see other officers gathering in the hallway, trying to peer around him to catch a glimpse of the impossible scene inside. 2 attack dogs sitting on a table like oversized house cats, completely focused on the pale man in the expensive suit. Ignoring the chaos, Thompson pulled out his phone and dialed his sister's number. Though he didn't want to, every instinct told him not to. But somehow he couldn't stop himself. She picked up on the first ring. "Tommy? Thank God, I've been trying to call you all morning. It's Mom. Her medication. The doctors say she needs to adjust the dosage immediately, and I didn't know who else to—" "Jesus, Sarah, slow down," Thompson said, forcing himself to focus despite his racing heart. "What's wrong with the medication? What do the doctors need?" "They said the dosage is too high and it's affecting her blood pressure. I need you to call Dr. Martinez and authorize the change because you're still her emergency contact and I can't reach—" Okay. I'll call him right now. Give me his number again." After getting the details and promising to handle it immediately, Thompson hung up and stared at the closed door, feeling like the world had tilted sideways and left him hanging over an abyss. Through the small glass window in the interrogation room door, installed so guards could monitor suspects, he could see Creed sitting perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, while the 2 dogs watched him with religious devotion. The man hadn't moved since Thompson left the room. Hadn't even blinked as far as Thompson could tell. Other officers were gathering in the hallway now, drawn by whispered rumors and the impossible scene. They crowded around Thompson, trying to peer through the door's small window over his shoulder. Conversations died as they caught glimpses inside. Someone whispered, "What the hell those dogs are doing with that guy?" But no one had an answer. Thompson slumped against the wall, his legs finally giving out, and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Chapter 17. Down the hallway, Lila and Riley walked toward Banks' office in tense silence. Through the windows overlooking the bullpen, they could see the crowd gathering around the interrogation room hallway, officers pressing against glass like kids at a zoo. "What the hell are you 2 doing back here?" Banks's voice could have stripped paint. He looked up from his paperwork as they entered, his weathered face already flushed with anger. Before either could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Detective Sabrina Cole appeared in the doorway with her usual composed stride, followed closely by Aiden Whitaker, whose jaw was set like concrete. "Captain," Sabrina said smoothly, "I understand there's an issue with the cemetery case witness." "There's no issue," Banks snapped. "The case is yours now, Detective Cole. Handle it." "We have been told that the witness refuses to speak to anyone but Hart and Riley," Aiden said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He won't even acknowledge Detective Cole's authority on the case." Riley bit back his immediate response. "Actually, he refuses to speak to anyone but Lila. Treated me like I was invisible. But no point bringing that up now. Let them figure it out themselves." Banks's eyes narrowed. Told by who? Aiden hesitated for just a moment. Patricia at the front desk. The witness spoke to her when he arrived. Banks turned his attention to Lila and Riley, his weathered face showing clear suspicion. So you two knew he was here and didn't think to mention it? Lila felt the accusation like a slap. Captain, we came straight to you after he called. We had no idea. He called you directly instead of going through dispatch. Banks interrupted, his voice sharp. And now he's downstairs refusing to cooperate with the assigned detectives. Convenient timing, don't you think? Riley's jaw clenched. You think we orchestrated this? I think it's interesting that our cooperative witness only wants to work with the two officers who just got pulled off the case. Sabrina stepped forward, cutting through the tension. Regardless of how this happened, he doesn't get to choose who handles the investigation, she said, her professional mask firmly in place. I'm the lead detective now, Wadis. Helsern Mairatais. Speak to me, or Mleifer, or he'll face obstruction charges. Riley almost laughed out loud. Good luck serving obstruction charges on someone who lives in a tomb and makes attack dogs sit like trained poodles. So what, we're supposed to beg some civilian to cooperate? Aiden's face was getting red, his family pride wounded by the very suggestion. Let him dictate terms to the entire department? Civilian. Right. Riley kept his expression neutral while watching the circus unfold. These people had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought badges and procedure would work on a man who'd emerged from a grave, like he was stepping out of a luxury car. Banks looked between them all, clearly sensing the undercurrents but unable to decode them. His suspicion about Lila and Riley seemed to war with his frustration at the entire situation. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice sharp. I don't care what games this witness wants to play. Detective Cole is the lead investigator. The witness will cooperate with her or face charges. Captain, Lila said quietly, speaking for the first time since entering the room. With respect, I don't think traditional approaches are going to work here. Why not? Banks demanded, his patience wearing thin. Riley and Lila exchanged glances. How do you explain to your captain that the witness might not be entirely human? That he'd made two attack dogs submit with nothing but his presence? That he knew things he couldn't possibly know? He's unconventional, Lila said carefully. Unconventional how? Aiden pressed, frustration bleeding through his professional veneer. What aren't you telling us? The room erupted, Sabrina insisting on her authority, her voice sharp with professional pride, Aiden backing her up with wounded family honor. Lila trying to explain how Creed operated, Banks trying to maintain order while clearly out of his depth. Riley watched it all with growing amusement, like a chess master watching amateurs argue over illegal moves. This is going to be fun to watch. They were arguing about procedure with a man who operated by rules they couldn't even comprehend. It would be like trying to arrest gravity or serve a warrant on time itself. After 10 minutes of circular arguing, Riley decided it was time to play his card. You know what? Riley held up his hand, his voice suddenly flat and reasonable. We're happy with the break-in case. Really, it's routine, it's clean. It'll probably wrap up in a day or two. The room went quiet, everyone turning to stare at him. Captain, we came back because we don't want the cemetery investigation held hostage by one uncooperative witness. Riley kept his tone neutral, professional, like he was discussing traffic assignments. We solve cases before Creed showed up, and we'll solve cases after he's gone. But right now, you've got a murder investigation sitting in limbo because nobody can figure out how to handle this guy. Banks leaned back in his chair, his weathered fingers drumming against the desk. Riley's words had hit their mark. The veteran captain could smell political trouble from a mile away, and a stalled murder investigation was exactly the kind of mess that brought unwanted attention from upstairs. His eyes moved between Riley's carefully neutral expression and Lila's professional composure, weighing options. Sabrina's eyes narrowed, detecting the subtle challenge beneath his reasonable words. What are you suggesting, Detective Riley? I'm suggesting you take charge of your case, Detective Cole. Riley's voice carried just the right amount of respect mixed with quiet confidence. You're the lead investigator. Captain Banks is backing you up. Detective Whitaker's your partner. Go down there and sort it out." Banks frowned, sensing undercurrents he couldn't quite identify. "What about you and Detective Hart?" "We'll wait. Send someone else to handle the Marigny Vale break-in while you three figure out how to deal with your witness." Riley's tone made it clear he thought they were about to walk into a buzzsaw, but was too professional to say it directly. "We just want to make sure justice gets served one way or another." Sabrina's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or determination. "We can handle one uncooperative witness, Detective Riley." "Sure you can." Riley kept his expression perfectly neutral, like a poker player with a royal flush. "I'm sure you can, Detective Cole. You've got more experience with unusual cases than we do." The subtle barb hit home. Sabrina's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but she maintained her composure like the professional she was. Banks looked between them all, clearly sensing the undercurrents but unable to decode them. Finally, he stood up with a heavy sigh that spoke of too many years dealing with departmental politics. "Fine. Detective Cole, Detective Whitaker, you're with me. Let's go have a conversation with Mr. Creed." As they filed out of the office, Riley caught Lila's eye and nodded slightly. Lila stared back at him with something close to amazement. In all their time as partners, she'd never seen Riley play people like this. He was the bull in a china shop type, direct confrontation, military precision, brute force solutions. Mind games and psychological manipulation? That wasn't his style. But here he was maneuvering Banks, Sabrina, and Aiden like pieces on a board, making them think they were in control while he orchestrated the entire situation. She'd stayed quiet partly because she recognized what he was doing, and partly because she was too impressed to interfere. Riley playing the long game was like watching a charging rhino suddenly start doing ballet. Unexpected, but undeniably effective. Phase 1 complete. Now let's see how far their badges get them with the man from the grave. Riley settled back in his chair, already imagining the looks on their faces when Creed treated them like furniture. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way, and I had a front row seat to watch it happen. Through the office window, he could see the crowd growing around the interrogation room hallway. Half the precinct was finding excuses to walk past that window, drawn by the impossible scene of 2 attack dogs sitting motionless on a table, while a pale man in an expensive suit held court like a king receiving subjects. Riley smiled without any stress for the first time all day. This was going to be educational for everyone involved. And that is the end of Part 3 of Creed's Grave, a Creed-Hart crime thriller by ChaseAustin, brought to you by Thrillverse Media. The adventure continues in the next explosive installment of Creed's Grave, and we hope you'll join us for the next thrilling part. We also invite you to explore ChaseAustin's other series and characters like Sam Wick action thrillers, Axel Monk action thrillers, Freelancer action thrillers, Wick Files action thrillers, and Aria Hunt FBI crime thrillers, as well as a variety of free short stories and bonus content available on our website, thechaseaustin.com. We appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to having you with us again soon.